The office air still smelled of Julian Thorne's expensive cologne when he stepped into my cubicle on Thursday afternoon. He had that patronizing smile plastered across his face, the one he normally reserves for charity galas and corporate brochures. He tapped his pen against my desk, leaving a faint black mark on my notes. "You will not need to prepare for tomorrow morning's meeting with the client," Julian said, his voice dripping with forced warmth. "Chloe will be taking the lead from this point forward. My daughter is ready for this responsibility." He announced it as if he were passing down a family heirloom, not the handoff of a $320 million contract that represents 40% of our firm's annual revenue. I did not argue. I did not make a scene, and I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I simply reached into my top desk drawer, pulled out the company-issued black mobile phone, and placed it on the desk between us. "Everything you need is in there," I said. Julian nodded, taking the phone as if he had just won a major victory. For anyone wondering how we arrived at this moment of executive foolishness, let me go back to the beginning of this story. I am 55 years old, and I have spent 28 years building a reputation for reliability in an industry that often discards experience for cheap talk. I came to Apex Consulting when it was a small firm of only 5 people, working long hours to build our reputation. Over the decades, I watched the firm grow, but I also watched the culture shift from client satisfaction to empty metrics and flashy presentations. I have been the lead account director for Oak Ridge Industries for 8 years. That means 8 years of late-night flights, solving supply chain crises, and hand-holding their senior executives through complicated integrations. I did all of this without a single mistake, earning the personal trust of their chief executive officer, Charles Albright. In a company where older professionals are often pushed toward early retirement to make room for cheaper labor, this account was my shield against corporate politics. But Julian Thorne had other ideas. He is 58 years old, and he loves flashy presentations and empty buzzwords. He joined our firm 6 years ago, bringing nothing but country club connections and an attitude of superiority. Recently, he had been parading his daughter Chloe around the office, trying to convince the board that she was a rising star in business development. In reality, Chloe is 24 years old, and her only professional credential is a 6-week online sales course she completed last winter. Despite her complete lack of experience, Julian insisted that she observe my meetings and review my client notes. It did not take long for things to turn sour. I noticed client calendar invites disappearing from my screen, files misplaced, and Chloe joining secure channels without authorization. When I asked her about it, she simply smiled and said she was collaborating. During client calls, she would chew gum, look at her personal phone, and suggest using social media influencers for a heavy industrial manufacturing company. When I corrected her politely, she complained to her father. Julian laughed it off, telling me to teach her my secrets, but you cannot teach 28 years of professional intuition. The turning point came on Tuesday at 5:46 in the evening. I was packing my briefcase when Liam, a young intern, stopped by my desk. He asked me why Chloe was modifying the client access portal, and why my name had been removed from the account roster. I did not scream or demand an explanation. I just nodded, thanked the intern, and went home. I checked my email and found a brief message from Chloe, with the title "Next Chapter," full of spelling errors and corporate jargon. By the time Julian officially took the account from me on Thursday, I was already detached. My professional pride had been wounded, but my mind was clear. I handed over the phone and walked out of the conference room, knowing that they had no idea of the legal minefield they were about to step into. They did not know about the special agreement I had signed with Charles Albright, and they did not know about the consequences of their actions. Julian and Chloe believed they had secured the ultimate prize, but they were about to discover that some contracts are bound by personal trust, not corporate ownership. I walked back to my office to pack my personal belongings, feeling a strange sense of peace as the office began to empty for the weekend. The desks were quiet, the hallway lights were dimmed, and the usual hum of printers had faded. I loaded my notebook and my favorite mug into a cardboard box. I did not feel anger, only a cold clarity. The firm had spent years talking about teamwork and alignment, but when it came down to it, family connections outweighed merit. I knew that trying to fight Julian directly would only lead to endless corporate politics and human resources investigations. Instead, I decided to let the system work its way to its natural conclusion. I walked out of the building into the cool evening air, took a deep breath, and drove home, leaving the keys to the kingdom in hands that had no idea how to hold them. To understand why the handoff was so dangerous, you have to understand the history of the Oak Ridge Industries account. 8 years ago, when I first secured their business, they were a mid-sized manufacturer, struggling to compete with larger conglomerates. Over the years, we worked closely to streamline their logistics and upgrade their software systems. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and absolute discretion. 5 years ago, at the Oak Ridge Annual Summit in Boston, we faced a major crisis. A rogue vendor had leaked confidential details of their upcoming product line, and their stock price was beginning to slide. Charles Albright was furious and threatened to terminate our contract on the spot. I spent 3 consecutive days in a hotel conference room, managing the communications, coordinating with public relations, and identifying the source of the leak. We stayed up all night, drinking bad coffee and reviewing access logs until my eyes burned. By the time the weekend was over, we had stabilized the situation, and the rogue vendor was replaced. That weekend forged a deep bond between Charles and myself. He realized that I was not just another consultant trying to bill hours, but a partner who would stand by his company during a crisis. After that incident, Charles insisted on signing a personal non-disclosure agreement. It was not a contract between our firm and Oak Ridge, but rather a direct covenant between Charles Albright and myself. He trusted me, not the corporate entity that employed me. The agreement contained Clause 3A, which was very specific. It stated that all communications regarding strategic roadmaps and future plans must remain exclusively between the two named signatories, Daniel Vance and Charles Albright. If any third party from my firm or any external agency contacted Charles or his executive team regarding these matters, without prior written consent from both of us, the entire services agreement would be immediately nullified. Even more sensitive was Appendix C of the agreement, which detailed Oak Ridge Industries' planned merger with a pre-IPO biotech startup called Helix Therapeutics. That merger was valued at $450 million, and it was a highly guarded secret. Any premature leak of this transaction would trigger a massive regulatory review and potentially ruin the deal. Charles Albright was incredibly protective of this merger, as it represented the future of his company. This merger with Helix Therapeutics was the crown jewel of Charles Albright's long-term plan. They had developed a breakthrough technology that could analyze blood proteins in real time, predicting health issues before they became critical. It was not just a commercial success. It was a passion project for Charles. He had spent years researching teams and finding the right partners. When he brought me into the inner circle, he made it clear that my role was to protect the data and ensure that no one outside our immediate team knew about it. I was the guardian of the keys, the person who kept the firewalls intact and the communications secure. On Thursday night, after handing over my phone, I sat in my study at home and reviewed the printed copy of the agreement. I did not delete any data from the company phone before giving it to Chloe, nor did I block her access to the general folders. I wanted everything to be exactly as it was, with no room for them to claim that I had sabotaged their transition. I spent the evening drinking chamomile tea, listening to the rain tap against my window, and reflecting on my career. I felt no resentment, only a quiet expectation. I knew that Julian and Chloe were completely unaware of the personal nature of the non-disclosure agreement, as they had never bothered to read the actual contract files. Julian Thorne had no interest in these technical details. He only saw the potential for a massive press release that would raise the stock price. He wanted his daughter to have her name on the deal, believing it would secure her career for the next decade. He did not care about the trust that had been built over 8 years, or the risk of leaking such sensitive information. He was blinded by his own greed and his desire to establish a family dynasty at the firm. This blindness was exactly what made him so dangerous, and it was also what made his downfall inevitable. On Friday morning at 6:17, I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking black coffee when my personal laptop chimed. It was an email from Charles Albright. The subject line was completely blank. The body of the message was short and direct. I saw the portal update. Are you still under the non-disclosure agreement? I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling my pulse remain steady. I typed exactly 9 words in response. Yes, still active. I have not authorized any changes. I hit send, closed the laptop, and finished my breakfast. By 8 o'clock, I was driving back to the office, wearing my standard charcoal blazer and a neutral shirt. I knew the storm was coming, but I felt completely prepared. As I walked through the lobby, I saw Julian at the coffee station, laughing with one of the junior partners and talking about the future of the firm. He looked like a man who believed he had just consolidated his power. Chloe walked past my office a few minutes later, wearing an oversized designer jacket and carrying a folder with colorful tabs. She did not look at me, and I did not say a word. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and waited for the clock to strike 9. I knew that within an hour, the corporate landscape of Apex Consulting would change forever, and no amount of family influence would be able to save Julian from his own arrogance. The meeting in conference room 3B began exactly at 9 in the morning on Friday. The room was cold, the air conditioning humming loudly in the background. The glass walls of the conference room looked out onto the busy office lobby, where employees were rushing to finish their tasks before the weekend. Julian Thorne sat at the head of the table, his posture upright and confident. Chloe was next to him, tapping her fingers on her digital tablet. Sylvia Brooks, our senior legal counsel, sat opposite them, looking through a folder with an expression of mild concern. I sat near the door, keeping my notebook open and my pen ready. The large television screen on the wall flickered, and the Zoom connection was established. Charles Albright's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his study in Boston, the morning sun casting sharp shadows across his desk. He did not smile, and he did not offer any pleasantries. His silver hair and cold, piercing eyes commanded immediate attention. Chloe Thorne did not seem to understand the gravity of the situation. As Charles Albright spoke, she sat with her chin up, looking at her tablet as if she were waiting for her turn to speak. She had brought a designer handbag to the meeting, placing it on the table as if it were a centerpiece. She whispered to her father, pointing at the screen and giggling. Julian tried to calm her down, but he was also trying to maintain his professional facade. Julian was the first to speak, his voice loud and eager. "Charles, it is great to see you," he said, leaning forward and flashing his white teeth. "I hope you received the introductory email from Chloe yesterday. She is thrilled to be taking over the account, and we have some exciting new strategies to discuss." He began using corporate buzzwords like generational alignment, digital modernization, and seamless synergy to justify the transition. Charles Albright, however, was not interested in these empty phrases. He had spent his entire career building a business based on facts, numbers, and personal trust. He looked at Julian with pure disgust. Charles raised his hand and the room went silent. "I am not here to discuss strategies, Julian," Charles said, his voice flat and cold. "I am here because that email represents a material breach of the personal non-disclosure agreement I have with Daniel Vance. Specifically, Clause 3A of the agreement. Emojis and match chats are not the language of professional relationships, Julian," Charles said, his voice flat and cold. "I do not care about your generational alignment when my legal agreements are being ignored. You have compromised a massive transaction because you wanted to give your daughter a shortcut. That is not leadership. That is malpractice." Julian blinked, his smile faltering. "I am sorry, Charles, but I assume the agreement was with our firm. Daniel signed it in his capacity as our employee, so surely the firm has the right to transition the account leadership to another representative." "It was a personal covenant," Charles replied, his eyes narrowing. "It was signed by Daniel Vance and myself as individuals. Clause 3A is explicit. No third-party communication without written consent from both signatories. Your daughter contacted my office, proposing a roadmap discussion and referencing internal materials. She is a third party. You did not obtain written consent. Therefore, the agreement is nullified." Sylvia Brooks quickly opened her binder and began reading the document. Her face turned pale as she scanned the pages. "Julian," she whispered, "he is right. The language is restrictive. There are no amendments on record, and the signature block lists Daniel Vance as an individual signatory." She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with panic. She was frantically searching for a loophole in the contract, but there was none. She knew that the firm was facing a massive crisis, and there was nothing she could do to prevent it. "But this is a minor transition," Julian argued, his voice rising in panic. "Surely we can resolve this without disrupting our partnership." "We are withdrawing our contract effective immediately," Charles said. "Per Section 7.2, the breach voids the engagement. All confidential materials shared during our partnership are now off-limits for reuse. This includes all roadmap data. My legal team will be sending the official termination notice within the hour. Your daughter suggested a virtual match-a-chat in her email to discuss our roadmap. That level of unprofessionalism is offensive to me." Chloe looked confused. "What does Section 7.2 mean?" she asked, looking at her father. No one answered her question. Charles looked directly at my camera window on the screen. "Daniel, thank you for the confirmation this morning," he said. "Your message helped me make my decision." Then, the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy. Julian sat back in his chair, his face pale and his hands shaking. He looked at Sylvia, who slowly closed her binder. "There is nothing we can do," she said quietly. "The contract is voided." I stood up, closed my notebook, and walked out of the room, leaving them to process the loss of a $320 million contract. The other partners in the hallway were staring, sensing the disaster that had just unfolded in the room. By Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office had shifted from panic to a grim realization of the consequences. The loss of the Oak Ridge Industries account was a massive blow to the firm, but the legal exposure was even worse. At 9 in the morning, I walked into room 5C for the compliance meeting. The room had no windows, only harsh fluorescent lights and a cold metal table. Fiona Gallagher, our lead compliance officer, was waiting for us. Julian and Chloe were already seated, looking exhausted and defeated. Sylvia Brooks was also present, along with a junior lawyer named Nolan. Fiona did not waste time. She opened a folder and placed a document on the table. "We have completed our preliminary audit of the transition files," she said, looking directly at Julian, "and we have found several severe irregularities." She turned to Chloe. On Thursday evening, an internal security handoff form was uploaded to the compliance database. This form authorized the transfer of the Oak Ridge portal access from Daniel to Chloe. The signature block contains Daniel's digital signature. However, our system logs show that Daniel was logged out of his workstation at that time, and the request was initiated from Julian's office. Fiona paused, letting her words register with the room. "Chloe, did you sign this document using Daniel's credentials?" Chloe looked at her father, then back at Fiona. "I had to," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The system was blocking my access because I did not have the security clearance. My dad told me it was just a formality and that we could fix the paperwork later." "This is a violation of California Penal Code. Section 470, Fiona said coldly. "Forgery of a digital signature on a corporate security document is a serious offense. Because of this forgery, the transition agreement is void ab initio. It has no legal validity, and it means the transfer of the account was unauthorized from the very beginning." The details of the audit were devastating. Fiona Gallagher explained that the system log files recorded the exact IP address and machine name used to complete the handoff. The request was submitted from the computer in Julian's office, using a saved administrator password that had been shared with Chloe. It was completed at 8:42 on Thursday night, long after I had left the building. Chloe had copied my digital signature file from an old project proposal and pasted it onto the compliance form. She had also bypassed the security questionnaire by checking boxes that confirmed I was present and consenting. Julian tried to speak, but Fiona raised her hand. "That is not all, Julian. Last week, during your presentation to the board of directors, you included 3 slides detailing a new precision health initiative. Those slides contained proprietary data and models from Oak Ridge Industries. Under Appendix C of the non-disclosure agreement, that data was classified as highly confidential roadmap material. By presenting that information to the board and listing it in the public minutes, you expose the firm to a potential insider trading investigation, Fiona continued. The biotech firm mentioned in those slides is a pre-IPO company. Sharing that data without written consent is a breach of fiduciary duty to our shareholders and a violation of federal regulations. The biotech company Helix Therapeutics was still in its private development phase, and public disclosure could have ruined its market launch. Nolan, the junior lawyer, nodded in agreement, pointing to a stack of case laws on his tablet. He explained that by bypassing compliance, the transition was not just administratively invalid, but legally non-existent under state regulations. This meant that the firm had no legal standing to defend itself against a breach of contract suit from Oak Ridge. Sylvia Brooks rubbed her temples, looking at the ceiling. She realized that Julian's desperate bid to secure his family's position had placed the entire firm in jeopardy. The partners would be furious when they learned that their largest source of revenue was lost because of a forged document. The firm's reputation in the consulting industry, built over 3 decades, was tarnished. The clients would begin to question our security protocols, and other accounts might decide to walk away as well. The financial impact would be felt for years, and it was all because Julian could not wait for a proper compliance review. He had wanted to make his daughter look like a savior, but instead he had become the firm's greatest liability. Julian slumped in his chair, his forehead wet with sweat. He looked at Sylvia Brooks, but our legal counsel was staring at the table. "This is a complete disaster," Sylvia said quietly. "The forgery alone voids our insurance coverage for contract disputes. We are looking at massive liability, and the board is going to demand answers." Julian sat in his chair, completely defeated, realizing that his attempt to promote his daughter had destroyed his career. He had wanted to show the board that his daughter could handle the firm's largest account, but instead he had exposed his own corruption. I sat quietly, watching the details unfold. I had not sought this outcome, but Julian and Chloe had walked directly into their own trap. They believed that power and family connections could override compliance and legal agreements. Now, they were facing the reality of their decisions, and there was no way out of this legal mess. At 3 in the afternoon on Monday, the board of directors held an emergency meeting to address the crisis. The boardroom was filled with senior partners, their faces grim and silent. Julian Thorne and his daughter Chloe were not present. They had been asked to wait in their offices. I sat at the far end of the table, next to Sylvia Brooks and Fiona Gallagher. Diana Frost, one of our oldest board members, opened the meeting. "The loss of the Oak Ridge contract represents a critical failure of leadership," she said, her voice sharp. "But the legal exposure from the forgery and the unauthorized disclosure of merger data is unacceptable. We must take immediate action to protect the firm." She looked at the compliance report on the table. The board voted unanimously to place Julian Thorne on immediate unpaid leave pending termination for breach of fiduciary duty. Chloe Thorne was dismissed from the firm effective immediately. The security team has already deactivated their badges and locked their workstations. Diana then turned her attention to me. "Daniel, you have been with this firm for 28 years, and your relationship with Oak Ridge is our only hope. Is there any way you can contact Charles Albright and convince him to reinstate the contract? We are willing to offer you a significant promotion and full authority over the consulting division." The board members were desperate to save the firm from ruin. Diana Frost kept appealing to my sense of loyalty, reminding me of the early days when we worked in that small office with only 5 employees. She offered to double my salary, grant me immediate stock options, and put me in charge of the entire consulting division. The other board members nodded, looking at me with pleading eyes. I looked at the faces around the table. They were desperate, looking for a quick fix to a problem created by their own negligence. They were willing to sacrifice Julian and Chloe, but they wanted me to clean up the mess. "I cannot do that, Diana," I said calmly. "The trust has been broken. Julian and Chloe did not just make a mistake. They committed forgery and violated a federal non-disclosure agreement. Charles Albright is a man of principle, and he does not do business with firms that ignore their own compliance protocols. Even if I wanted to, the damage is done." Julian and Chloe's actions prove that this firm does not value trust or compliance, and no amount of money can change that. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it on the table. This is my formal resignation, effective at the end of the week, I said. I will assist with the internal audit and help transition the remaining accounts, but I will not remain with Apex Consulting. I had already prepared my resignation letter, and my lawyer had drafted a severance agreement that included 2 years of salary, full health benefits, and a release from all non-compete clauses. I placed the documents on the table and stood up. The board members looked at each other in silence. They knew they could not force me to stay, and they knew my compliance report gave me all the leverage. I had negotiated a generous severance package that reflected my 28 years of service, and I was leaving on my own terms. I packed the remaining folders, my calendar, and the small wooden desk clock my father had given me when I first started in consulting. The office that had been my home for 28 years now felt like a stranger's house. I looked out the window one last time, watching the traffic on the street below. I knew that many of the junior associates were worried about their jobs, but they also knew that Julian's greed was the root cause of the disaster. As I walked out, Fiona Gallagher stopped me in the lobby. She shook my hand and thanked me for my years of service, saying that the firm would never be the same without me. I told her that change is inevitable, and that sometimes you have to let the old structure fall to build something better. I walked to my car, feeling a deep sense of relief. My reputation was clean, my bank account was secure, and I had the freedom to choose my own path. I was ready to build my own consulting practice, one based on real relationships and absolute integrity. I would no longer have to navigate the toxic politics of corporate climbers. I was the master of my own destiny, and that was the greatest victory of all. As I walked out of the boardroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had spent nearly 3 decades building this firm, only to watch it compromise its values for nepotism. I was 55 years old, and I was ready to start a new chapter. I had the experience, the relationships, and my reputation was completely intact. I returned to my office and finished packing my things. As I walked down the corridor, I saw several colleagues who had heard about the board's decision. They whispered their support, thanking me for standing up to Julian's nepotism. I shook hands with Liam, the intern, and told him to always keep his files secure and never compromise his principles. I walked out of the building and into the afternoon sun, carrying my box of personal belongings. My phone rang. It was a message from Charles Albright. He wanted to know if I was available for lunch the next day to discuss a new independent consulting contract for Oak Ridge Industries. I smiled and replied that I was available. I had won the corporate game on my own terms, and my future was completely mine to write.